IVM.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Musafir Stories, India's very own travel podcast, where each week we share the journey of travelers in their own words and relive their experiences with you, our listeners.
Hey guys, welcome to a brand new episode of the Musafir Stories. Hope you're all well and keeping safe. On the podcast today, we have Aditya Worah, a traveler and an audio producer. In fact, our audio producer, Aditya, has actually produced a few of the episodes for Musafir Stories as well in the past. But really excited to have him on the podcast. So let's hop onto the episode and find out where Aditya is taking us to today. So with that introduction, we'd love to welcome Aditya Worah, a podcast producer, in fact, our podcast producer formerly, and also somebody who has a very unique niche of walking about in Delhi. So we'll find out more about that. But Aditya, thank you so much for being a part of the Musafir Stories and welcome to the podcast.
Hey, hi, Saif. Great to be here. I've small world. I've been a producer, I've been a listener, and here I am, a guest on the show.
Yeah, it's a really funny story how this came about. For some reason, I had no idea when reaching out to Aditya that Aditya had actually been a producer for a short duration of the Musafir Stories with IVM podcasts. But yeah, Aditya does a bunch of things and I just gave you a flavor of what all he does. Aditya, the intro I gave was very brief and short. Why don't you tell us a little bit more? And I'm very keen on understanding and having the listeners as well understand a little bit more about your I walk in Delhi part of the introduction.
So, okay, where do I start? I am an audio producer, as you've already introduced. I've been with IVM in the past. I've been with Radio Mirchi in the past. And currently, I'm with Legends League Cricket. We're making this amazing podcast called 180 Not Out. I've been in Delhi for 10 years now. This is my 10th year here. And the one thing I love, even in these 52-degree summers, is just walking in Delhi. Like last month, I walked 200 kilometers. In the worst summer imaginable. And it's just something I have picked up over the years. I mean, walking helps me connect better with the city. It helps me, find out these small little things happening around me all the time. Ki aaj yahan pe kuch naya hai, something's different here today, all of that. It's just something I do for fun, but...
Yeah, that's brilliant. And as a part of this overall walks that you, or your own walks that you do, you also lead other walks, right? And in addition to this, do you want to touch a little bit about that too?
Yeah, I do lead heritage walks. I used to actually, because now it's the summers and everything's on a pause for now. They'll be back in winters, hopefully. So I used to lead them for this day. It's a heritage walk organization. And I particularly lead these walks across the Chandni Chowk area and the Humayun's Tomb area, because these are the two places which I feel have a great story to tell. And my focus is largely on the urban myths and the urban legends around them. I'm not a historian, so I have to factor in different aspects of that as well. So my walks are mostly around, the mythologies around the place, the stories around the place. They're not necessarily facts, but they add in this whole, there's this... the mystique of the place. They add to the mystique of the place around you. So it's that aspect that I bring out in these walks.
Yeah, absolutely. And Delhi does not have a dearth of stories and these urban legends that you mentioned, right? So many of those and so many layers and layers to unravel and peel off. So I'm glad that we have a chance to connect now and speak a little bit to this as well. And obviously this will be an area we'll be delving into more today. On the podcast today, where would you like to take us and the listeners to?
So I noticed you've already had a podcast on Old Delhi. So let me take you to the other side, the New Delhi. This is the new British capital. The area which was largely redeveloped after 1911. It's that side of the city. So the walk, as I see it, it begins at the Lodi Gardens. It goes through all of these, as you call them, the avenues of power, where you have these offices of the political parties, you have the Rashtrapati Bhavan, you have the India Gate, all the houses around that. And then it eventually ends at Connaught Place. So this is the larger area that we'll be looking at.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, so a little bit more of the contemporary part of Delhi, you could say, given that, again, this is all relative, but given how long the history of Delhi and the different cities of Delhi even goes back to, so we are referring to the newer part of Delhi, or what is referred to as New Delhi. And do you want to perhaps speak a little bit to this very layered history of Delhi as well, Aditya? Just how many cities over cities have been built over the past several hundred years in the place?
Absolutely. So Delhi, as we know it today, it's a collection of different cities over time which have come together. Depending on who you ask, you can be told there are 7 cities, 8 cities, 9 cities, 11 cities of Delhi. So let me just quickly take you through it, because I know you've already discussed this in a previous episode. So Delhi starts with the 7 cities basically. They start with Lal Kot, which is at Mehrauli, which is the oldest city of Delhi. And it is the same place where Qutub Minar eventually comes up and the old city starts off. We move forward by a few years. Then there's the second city of Delhi, which is Siri, which is started by Alauddin Khilji. The so-called the 1,000-pillared hall is set up over there and all of that. Then the third city comes up, that is Tughlaqabad, which is Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq city. From the same dynasty, Muhammad bin Tughlaq sets up Jahanpana. And a third Tughlaq king sets up Firozabad, that is Firoz Shah Tughlaq. Then comes Deenpana, which was again Humayun's capital, over which Sher Shah built some more stuff. And then for a long period of time, Delhi gets deserted. This is the mid-1500s I'm talking about. Until the mid-1600s, when Shah Jahan decides to return to the city. And that's when Shah Jahanabad or Chandni Chowk area as we know it today, it was set up. So this was the history of Delhi until 1857. 1857, the British decide to take over, and after that comes a new era, which is where the city of New Delhi was built. So that's the context to, that's the past of the city so far. We'll be starting from the point where Calcutta was no longer the capital.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, you give a quick recap here. Delhi is just drowned in history, you could say. So many layers and layers and layers, and even I've thoroughly enjoyed my few visits to Delhi, in spite and despite. Like, my first experience in Delhi was in the summers, right? Obviously I was really young when we traveled there first, and there was, I think, only able to travel because we had summer holidays and stuff. But yeah, I still have fond memories of visiting Delhi for the first time then. And since then, I've learned so much about Delhi that still continues to just wow me, right? Every time I listen and find out all of these new things about Delhi, it's always really great to hear. And that's why also I'm really glad that we are covering Delhi again, and although a different facet of Delhi. So like you mentioned, we're starting off from a point where the new Delhi was built, right? After the capital was moved from Calcutta to here by the Raj. At what point do you kick off this walk, Aditya? Do you want to shed some light around the first point, and what sort of a backstory you have to start the walk with?
Right. So the backstory actually begins way back. It begins in 1911. That's when King George V comes to India. He holds the Dilli Darbar. That is the third and the final Dilli Darbar. And this is the time where he announces that the capital is moving from Calcutta to Delhi. And this is the time, he sets the foundation stone of the capital and all of that, and then he leaves. But then it takes another 20 years to finish the construction. The capital finally gets inaugurated in 1931. And before that, I would also want to add a little bit of more context to this. So when we look at Delhi, it's not just cities. Delhi is also a collection of villages. So when you look at today's the Lutyens Delhi, the premier Lutyens bungalow zone, it is actually based on what used to be villages in the past. There were these villages called Raisina, Malcha, Kushak, Tal Katora, Moti Bagh. These are all names that are still around us today in different forms. Like the Raisina Hill, which is where the Rashtrapati Bhavan is. It actually was based on the village of Raisina. Behind that is the Malcha Mahal, which was the village of Malcha. Then there is Kushak Mahal, which was at the village of Kushak. So that's how it has changed over the years. Even Purana Killa, which also falls under the New Delhi area, even that used to have a village inside it. Another interesting thing about this is that when New Delhi was built, it was actually built not just over the ruins of Old Delhi, it was actually built with the ruins of these old villages beneath it. So when the buildings were demolished, when the houses were demolished, they actually took all the stone from there and they used that to build the new capital. In fact, Dr. Swapna Little points out in her book, Connaught Place in the Making of New Delhi, that 60,000 cubic feet of stone was used to get this built. Mm-hmm. And this has been something which is a recurring theme in the history of the city. There's this great book called The Seduction of Delhi. It's a collection of poems by a poet and diplomat Abhay K. And he calls it the palimpsest city. A palimpsest is basically a piece of paper upon which things have been written over and over. And that's exactly how Delhi is. So, coming back to the villages are destroyed and destroyed with great cruelty. Like the British sent over cannons to, have some people relocate. And once the villages were gone, they started building the new city over there. Our walk actually begins from the Lodhi Gardens. Mm-hmm. Okay, now enough with the history. I'm not a historian. I was just setting some context.
No, it's great. It's definitely great. And please feel free to add as much as you'd like to.
Yeah. So we will start our walk with Lodi Gardens. And, I'm sure a lot of our listeners would have heard about this place in Delhi. It's a very iconic garden over here, which encompasses a number of tombs and other smaller monuments. This too was actually a village. This was the village of Khairpur, upon which a garden was eventually laid out, and this built this whole thing. In fact, when they were drawing up the map of New Delhi, they were actually considering which monuments to keep and which monuments to not preserve. So some of these monuments, which came under the Lodi Gardens area, they actually drew like a garden around it and said, we can preserve this here. And that's how those stayed over there. So that's where we begin our walk. And last fun fact about that place, the Lodi estate is also called Steinabad. It is named after Joseph Stein, an architect who actually, redesigned the gardens after the British left. And
interesting.
I want to make a special mention of this because we will also end with another architect.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I'll be very honest here and probably aging myself too. Whenever, obviously the Lodi Gardens, right, like you mentioned, primarily the memorials and tombs built for the rulers of the Lodi Sultanate or the Lodi Empire. My memory always, even though we've studied this in our history books and everything in school, my first memory whenever I hear about Lodi goes back to, I don't know if how old you were when this came about, right? Shah Rukh Khan did a couple seasons of Kaun Banega Crorepati, right?
Yes.
And in that, I think there was a funny question where Lodi Samrajya ki sthapna kisne ki, Ibrahim Lodi, Balo Lodi, Sikandar Lodi, and one more Lodi, right? This guy, he just repeats that, phone a friend's friend and repeats that. And in the duration of that 30 seconds, that friend goes from option A to B to C, I think, and just leaves the guy confused. So it's a very funny clip. I'll probably link that in the show notes too. But whenever the name Lodi comes up, like that's my first memory or recollection that goes back to that funny question. But here's where you start off the walk at. And I think it's also good that some of these have been retained, right? I mean, one for obviously the architectural heritage, right? These are all beautiful structures, so that way it's a great way of preserving them to whatever extent possible. And secondly, it also gives that little bit of lung space in what is a very, very concrete heavy city, I would say, right? Delhi, especially the urban part of Delhi.
Absolutely, much needed. But again, maybe I have a little bias towards Delhi, but when I compare it with other metros around the country, I think Delhi still has many more green spaces. Especially with the kind of, the Jahanpana forest and all of those urban forests inside the city. It's a much greener city compared to other metros.
Yeah, no, that's, I think that's a fair point, and kudos to like whoever took up the planning that they decided to, I think even I read when I was looking this up that even when this was being rebuilt or the city of New Delhi was being built, about a third was actually allocated to green spaces or leaving those regions unbuilt, right? So I think it's great that we have some of that remaining. And I mean, it is already at 52 degrees. I don't know, without these last remaining forest covers or green cover, how much more horrible it'd be having to live through the summers. Yeah, so I'm glad that we still have these remaining. But awesome. So thank you for kicking off the walk there. And tell us a little bit more, like what kind of things are you seeing around the Lodi Gardens? How much time do you spend there, and where do you head off to from here?
So Lodi Gardens would take you about 40 minutes to walk through the entire circumference of the park. Post that, you can actually step out and move towards Khan Market. That's the next stop on our walk. Khan Market is this upscale Delhi market which came up post-partition, and it was actually built to allocate land to these immigrants who came from the northwest frontier provinces in Pakistan. So after the partition, when they moved in, a lot of Delhi has actually been, reshaped after 1947 because of the partition. So when they came in, this was an area which was given to them for their resettlement and for their, for them to set up their shops. So that little market, back in the 1950s or 60s or whenever it was set up, today it has become one of the most premium marketplaces in the country. In fact, Delhi's first apartment complex also came up right there, right next to the Khan Market. This was the Sujan Singh Park. Built, of course, by Khushwant Singh's grandfather. Named after Khushwant Singh's grandfather, built by his father, Sir Sobha Singh. Incredible place. It still stands. It's not in the best of conditions, but it's a piece of history right there. And I must also point out that this Sir Sobha Singh, he was also involved in a lot of construction in the city. Back in the very early days, even in the British time. He was actually called Adhi Dilli Ka Malik, master of half the Delhi. Owner of half the Delhi. He was a senior contractor in the construction of the city, and we'll also come to a couple of other important landmarks that he was the contractor of and even actually managed himself. Khan Market also has two places which I would strongly recommend everyone to go to. They are two bookstores. They are two legendary bookstores, and if you know anything about Delhi, you probably know what I'm talking about. It's the Fakir Chand and then there's Bahari Sons. Yeah. These are two incredible bookstores in the city, and their legacy, of course, unparalleled.
Absolutely. And a very, very posh area of Delhi also, right? The Khan Market area. I read that even the 20th or something on the list of the most expensive shopping places around the world even.
Makes complete sense. Makes complete sense. So we now move from Khan Market to the neighboring Humayun Road, where you have a very unique place of worship in the city. It is the Judah Hyam Hall. It's the synagogue. It's the only synagogue in North India. And you also have a cemetery right next to it, where you have a lot of, the legendary, Jewish people of the city buried there, including some war heroes of the country as well. A general from the Bangladesh war is also there. It's a very beautiful place. It's a very, quaint, hidden place, but right in the middle of one of the most important places of the city. In fact, it's actually open for everyone. If you go there on Fridays, you can also get the Shabbat prayers at the evening.
Yeah, interesting. It's pretty interesting to know that this is the only synagogue in North India, right? I mean, in the south, I think there's a few of them, and obviously in Kochi and places like that, they become pretty popular too as places where people or tourists often visit to. But in my visits, I've never had a chance to be here, and it's great to know that it's also the only synagogue in North India.
Yeah, and the rabbi is also a very interesting man. There's this guy called Ezekiel Malikar who does the service over there, and he can actually do it in 3 languages. He does it in 4 languages. He does it in English, he does it in Hebrew, he does it in Hindi, and he does it in Marathi as well. Like one of these days I was there and he was actually holding an online service for people in Maharashtra. I was surprised to see this rabbi in Delhi giving a service in Marathi, and we had Sikhs, Muslims, people of different communities sitting over there. It was beautiful.
Wonderful. And you're saying this is open to visit, right? As a tourist or a visitor, you can walk in. Okay.
Yes.
Good to know. Awesome. And from here, where you headed off to?
We are still in that area. There's this place called the Street Art Nukkad over there. And it's this small corner, small intersection of the streets where you have a lot of graffitis on the wall. You have a lot of these murals on the wall, and they've all been done by the Delhi Street Art. It's this organization which does a lot of these, pieces of art across the city. Interestingly, one of my favorite artworks over there, and I think it's also available on Google Maps. It's called the AP Dillon Art Mural. AP, of course, as we do, is the singer behind a lot of hits these days.
Yeah.
So there's that, and there's actually a whole section of low-income housing, and all their walls are actually just murals. It's a very beautiful place to walk through. As you cross this, as you move towards the main road, you cross the Taj Hotel, and then as you keep walking, you start getting the feel of New Delhi. You start getting the feel of the Lutyens' bungalow zone, because now this is the point that you are actually in those corridors of power. This as you move towards from the Taj towards maybe Akbar Road, you find this central monument over there. It's called the Lal Bahadur Shastri Memorial. Of course, as the name suggests, it's a memorial dedicated to India's second Prime Minister, Lal Bahadur Shastri. And this is an interesting area because just behind it, you have the Congress headquarters. The AICC is over there. And just behind it, just behind the AICC is 10 Janpat. Anyone who has covered or followed any sorts of politics in India knows that this is such an important landmark. That's where Sonia Gandhi lives. So that's a very, anytime anything happens in Delhi, you'll have media vans lined up over there. In fact, I was actually walking there around the time of the Karnataka elections, and there was a huge celebration going on. People were bursting crackers outside. It was quite the party over there. So it's just that area. If you move forward, you reach the vice president's home. You also have the BJP party president's home over there. And it's just this whole cluster of houses. You have all the MPs living nearby. You have all the, Supreme Court justices living nearby. You have senior ranking of officials of the Army, Navy, Air Force. You've got IAS and IPS officers of high ranks. They're all there. And sometimes I actually enjoyed doing this, that I walk through those roads, I look at the names, and I'm like, where have I heard this name before? And then I try to recall, acha ye yahan ka MP hai, ye hai. And it's really fun walking through those roads.
Yeah, no, truly corridors of power, like they say, right? In a literal sense here, where you're walking through the area of which houses some of the very powerful people in the country. And also, just to give a little bit of a background about Lutyens, right? Obviously, it has become a little bit of a derisive term, I would say, in the recent past, right? It's used, Arnab probably made it popular with Lutyens media and everything, but it basically is named after the architect who built this region, like you mentioned, when the New Delhi was being built. Sir Edwin Lutyens, Aditya?
Right. So Edwin Lutyens and Herbert Baker, these were the two people who were primarily responsible for the look and the feel of the new capital. In 1911, when the construction started, it was these guys who were the brains behind it. And interestingly, if you look at the architecture of the administrative buildings and the buildings which actually hold the power in the city, for example, the Rashtrapati Bhavan or the North Block and the South Block, those buildings, you will actually find a very interesting mix of Indian architecture along with European architecture. This was actually done intentionally so that, they wanted to project the fact that we represent you, and which is why this was done. And in fact, Lutyens was not a fan of this. He did not want to incorporate Indian architecture into this, but eventually, because of, the consensus was that this should be done. And so we have the look and feel that we have today.
Yeah, it's interesting. And like you mentioned, him and Herbert Baker will probably be names you come across a lot when you see a lot of the important buildings that have been designed or built in the area. Of course, people living in Delhi are very familiar with these names and terms and areas. But for outsiders, right, these were not as common until they started being out in media. Like Arnab made that for through Lutyens media popular, like I said, or unpopular. But even Khan Market, through the Khan Market gang and all those types of the phrases that have been used recently, like these places have become a lot more popular and people relate to them far more quicker, I'm sure. I don't know how do you feel about that?
Absolutely. I feel that's absurd, okay. Any sane person would say that is very absurd. But also, for some reason, coincidentally, this zone that we are talking about, this area where we are talking about today, it's actually in the center of so many controversies. In fact, I was just coming to this. So, up next, after, this area, where we head into is the India Gate area. And that is in the news for all the wrong reasons because of the Central Vista project.
Yeah.
So, let me now just give you a brief overview of this side of the walk. So, when you keep walking straight from this area, from the Akbar Road, you eventually head into India Gate. I'll come to India Gate in a bit, but before that, right opposite India Gate, you have the Rashtrapati Bhavan. Rashtrapati Bhavan on one end, India Gate on the other. That is your Central Vista, if you put it together. The road that goes through between, it used to be called Kingsway at some point. Then it became Rajpath. And again, it's under controversy for the new name, Kartavya Path. So let me just start with the Rashtrapati Bhavan. This is actually built upon the Raisina Hill, where, as we mentioned earlier, there was this village of Raisina. The original plan was that this Rashtrapati Bhavan, it was of course built as the Viceroy's house. There's actually a movie by that name. The Viceroy's house was supposed to be built on the hilltop, and the administrative wings, which are the north block and the south block, they were supposed to be built elsewhere, below the hill. But eventually they decided that let us, bring all the administrative power on top of the hill. And so that every time when, people look up, they see the power. So that was the idea behind having that on the hilltop. As we move down the road from there, you walk across the Central Vista, and through this, you are actually, this road that goes from Rashtrapati Bhavan to India Gate is actually intersected by multiple roads. And on both the sides, there are these gardens, and the central road that intersects it is the most important one. That is the Janpath Road, which was it was called Queensway in the past, but it's now the Janpath. So Rajpath was the royal path and Janpath was the common path. The royal path went from Viceroy's house to All India War Memorial, that is the India Gate, the original name. And the commoner's path, it actually went from Akbar Road all the way to Connaught Place, which is where we'll eventually end this walk. So let me now get to the India Gate side of things. There's actually a very interesting thing behind it. I love walking around the India Gate, and I would strongly recommend all our listeners to do this, maybe in a better weather than there is right now. So when you walk across this hexagon that is around India Gate, you actually come across a lot of houses. And these are also names which people have probably heard. There's the Mandi House, there's Hyderabad House, Baroda House, Jaipur House, Bikaner House. All of these are buildings which are often in public discourse. So let me just quickly go through this. This area was actually allotted in New Delhi to princes who were loyal to the British, who were supporting the British, who were ruling independently but were under British control. The British were not directly ruling their regions. And, after the Privy Purse was abolished by Indira Gandhi in the 70s, these houses became government buildings, and they are very popular. Patiala House, for example, is now a district court. The Bikaner House is now a space for art and culture. You get food inside it. There's the Mandi House at a place called Mandi House, which now has a Doordarshan office inside it. There's the Jaipur House, which is the National Gallery of Modern Art. The Baroda House, it's got the railways inside it. In fact, they also have a rail engine in front of it. Another interesting house, which I actually didn't know about, but I stumbled across it while I was walking, is the Bahawalpur House. Bahawalpur, of course, is in Pakistan today. But the Bahawalpur House building is a very popular one because that is where the National School of Drama is. So it's this very fascinating place to walk around, to take a walk around this hexagon.
Absolutely. And I would also say another thing is in terms of the experience, right? Let's say compared to Old Delhi, it is also very, in its own way, I would say, enjoyable when you walk there, just in the hustle and the bustle. These places that you're mentioning are all very, very accessible that way, right? With very neatly paved sidewalks and everything. So walking about is definitely not an issue here as compared to, like, let's say, Old Delhi or Shahjahanabad.
Right. This is extremely easy to walk in. It's extremely accessible. And, both places have their own charm. You can go to Old Delhi and enjoy these old Havelis and the Red Fort and the Purani Delhi ka khana and all of that. But there's also this very beautiful sort of an experience to, just hang around India Gate at 12:30 in the night, to have an ice cream across that. It's a part of the Delhi experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just fascinating how different those two experiences are also, right? And I really appreciate Delhi for that.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, after passing through, or like you mentioned, all of these important houses across this area, what's the next point of interest that you stop at?
There's the India Gate itself. So these houses are aligned at a hexagon around the India Gate. And in the center, there's the India Gate. Not exactly in the center, but like the center of the hexagon. This place was actually supposed to be the Princess Park when it was being planned. So all these princes will have their houses around this, and this will be a common open place for them. But eventually, the All India War Memorial came up over there, which is now known as the India Gate. This itself is a very fascinating monument, and I think it's one of the most popular and iconic monuments of Delhi. Even when you represent the city in these minimal posters and all of that, you often see the image of India Gate over there. So there's that, and India Gate, it has the gate itself, which was dedicated to the soldiers of the British Indian Army who fought in the First World War. And behind that was a statue of King George V. It was after independence, it was eventually, defaced, and it was, asked to be removed. And the government actually did remove it. But there's a very funny story after that, So the government asks the authorities in Britain to take away the statue. And they deny it. They say we don't have the funds for it.
Oh.
Then they go to the High Commission, the British High Commission in India. They said, no, we don't have the space for it.
Wow.
So the statue eventually ends up in this place called the Coronation Park, which is in the northern side of Delhi, and it also makes sense over there because that is the place where King George V was coronated in the Delhi Darbar. Mm-hmm. So the statue remains there. It has been defaced. There are a number of other statues over there, other governor generals, viceroys, and all of those, and they have most of them have been defaced beyond recognition. One of them actually looks like Lord Voldemort. It's horrifying. So there's the India Gate. I would actually like to go back to Janpat now. Janpat is this central point which intersects the Central Vista. And on the Janpat, you actually find a very interesting building, also under some controversy right now. This is the National Museum. The controversy, of course, is that it is being, demolished and being relocated to the North Block and the South Block in a larger museum space. We don't really have a date as to when that will happen, but that is supposed to happen. But while it is still there, I strongly recommend anyone listening to go and spend some time at the National Museum. It will easily take you about 1.5 to 2 hours inside that. It's a beautiful, beautiful museum. Even architecturally, it's such a great place to be in. That's one place I would really like to urge you. And since we are also talking about museums, I also want to talk about the National Gallery of Modern Art, which is at the hexagon around India Gate. This place has at display the Navratna artists of India. These are 9 artists who by law are protected. Whichever artwork of theirs is being sold beyond the Indian borders, the government actually tries to buy it back. It's a great place to be at. Check out some Indian art. You can easily spend a whole day over here in this hexagon.
Absolutely. Like even the points you're mentioning, right? Some of them obviously points to more pass by, but others like these, you could literally spend a day or part of a day easily just around the museums and some of the other places that you mentioned, right? You could easily spend a lot more time there. Obviously, during the walks, you're mentioning them, giving some backstories about how they came up or the architecture and then moving on, but they could easily be like their own little trips, right? If you have an interest in these areas.
Right. This area is actually so rich in these cultural places. In fact, I'm sort of going off topic right now, but you can actually visit another museum which is very nearby. Must be like a kilometer from the Rashtrapati Bhavan. Not even that much, I assume. That is the Pradhan Mantri Sangrahalaya, which has just come up. This has opened up in the Teen Murti House, former residence of Jawaharlal Nehru. The Pradhan Mantri Sangrahalaya is a great museum. It's actually a place which will take about maybe 2 to 3 hours for you to visit, and it's one of the most modern, state-of-the-art kind of a museum built in recent days. And right next to it is also, of course, the Nehru Planetarium. So you can maybe combine that as well. And the metro connectivity in this area especially, it's really well connected. You have the Khan Market Metro over here, you have the Patel Chowk Metro over here, you have the Central Secretariat over here, the Janpath Metro, the Rajiv Chowk, Connaught Place Metro itself. There is the Mandi House Metro, Barakhamba Metro. So all of these metro stations are like right there. It's very well connected.
Yeah.
Okay, enough. I have digressed. I must come back to the Janpath Road. So when you walk across the Janpath Road, straight from the National Museum, you will eventually head into Connaught Place. Before you go there are 2-3 other places that you must check out. Firstly, there's of course the Jantar Mantar, built by Sawai Jai Singh, the ruler of the Jaipur estate, and Raja Jai Singh, sorry, not Sawai Jai Singh II. He was the ruler of Jaipur who built this in the Mughal times. This came up in the 1700s. Jantar Mantar is known more for the protest side these days than for the monument itself. Something about this episode, the controversies just don't keep ending. In fact, when we discussed about doing this episode, I actually took a walk around that area, and a protest was going on there at the time for the NEET examinations.
And we've seen some interesting developments. Yeah.
Unfortunate, but yeah. So this area has, the protests don't actually happen in Jantar Mantar itself. They happen right behind it. There's a designated protest area there now, which is sort of cordoned off and everything, but protests happen over there. But, next to the protest site, there's an amazing dosa place. It's called Kutti's. I, in fact, like to club it together with the protest. It's Dissent and dosa.
Yeah.
It's a great place to have some South Indian food in the morning. They also have these great big gulab jamuns that you can try out. So there's that, and this area itself is also, it's built upon some, villages from the past. When the redevelopment was done for the Janpath side of the New Delhi, they had Jai Singh Pura and Madho Singh Pura. These two villages were actually, taken over, and all of these places were built, the new city. So this theme of villages turning into New Delhi continues.
Yeah, for sure. And again, just from a perspective of somebody from outside, right? Like these things wouldn't have been as evident, right? You would just think that they've been named after an important place or personality or event, and you would have moved on. But thank you for adding that context that these are actual villages, and that's what they've been named after, right in the process of the rebuild. So it's, I think, important to know that.
The memory of the villages sort of stays here.
Yeah.
In fact, when you look at the Raisina area, there's the Talkatora village which was taken over, and you have the Talkatora Stadium over there. So many of these places. Dr. Little writes in a book, Connaught Place and the Making of New Delhi. She also talks about some other villages which have been taken over, but the names remain.
I'm glad that they still remain, and we'll see for how long before somebody jumps in and wants it renamed after somebody they admire, right? So hopefully this retains the original place that it was built on, right? So interesting, and thank you for providing that context as well.
Right. So let us now head into my favorite part of the city, my absolute favorite part of the city, Connaught Place. So when you walk straight from Janpat, you head into Connaught Place. This was designed as the commercial complex of the new city. So when you build a city, you just don't build housing and administrative wings and all that. You also need like a big district shopping center. So that's what Connaught Place originally was, still is. It's got two concentric circles. There is the outer circle, the middle circle, and the inner circle. So it's actually the inner circle, which is the Connaught Place. The outer circle is the Connaught Circus, and you've got everything over here. You've got movie theaters, you've got restaurants, you've got gyms, you've got shopping arcades, you've got bookshops. Everything's here. And I just want to talk about some of the legendary places of Connaught Place because, I'm sure the place needs no introduction. People beyond Delhi also know what CPA is, Connaught Place is. So I'll just cut through that. This is named after the Duke of Connaught, an important member of the royal family. It was ready in the late 20s. The construction started a little earlier. And originally when Connaught Place came up, a lot of the shops that were set up there were actually these old businesses from other parts of the city. They came in and settled over here and they started their stores. And there are some names which still remain. For example, Cantor's, the milkshake brand. It started from here. They had a dairy farm nearby. They decided to move in here and their shop has been there ever since. Another popular place called the Wenger Bakery. That started in Kashmiri Gate in the early 20s. They eventually moved to Connaught Place and they had a thriving business. They had multiple floors. One of the floors was a ballroom. Weddings used to take place there. They had a restaurant and all of that has since wound down and they just have a small floor space there. But the bakery still continues. In fact, the Wall Street Journal has a very good article on the history of Wenger. I recommend the readers to go through that, the listeners to go through that. There are many other old establishments which are still around. There's a very small, almost a place which you might miss if you're not specifically looking for it. It's called Ramchandar and Sons. It's a small toy shop which has been around, ever since Connaught Place came up. I was actually reading up about it in this great book written by Aditya Roy Chaudhary. So she writes that she was talking to the owner and the shop still looks very old world. They are one of these people who are very excited to talk to you about the history of the shop and all of that. It's actually it's an experience to go there. It's like time travel. Then other old places are like there's the Amrit Book Company, which was around there since the late 1930s. One more place I would like to mention is the Quality Restaurant. It's a place I frequent a lot. It's one of the oldest establishments over there. It's there since the 1940. They started as an ice cream shop, but have since moved on to a fine dining place. I would urge everyone listening this, if you are in Delhi, if you happen to visit Connaught Place, do not miss the Chole Bhature over here.
Oh, okay.
So there's that. Another very interesting place in Connaught Place is the Dhumimal Art Gallery. This is actually, it started off as a small stationery shop in Delhi's Chowdi Bazaar. It's a place in Old Delhi. And, they were known for selling good quality paper, particularly the ones that artists used to draw. In fact, when he set up his shop in Connaught Place, artists such as M.F. Hussain used to visit the place. Some of these artists didn't really have a lot of money to buy it, so they would actually pay him back with pieces of art, which they still have in their collection.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's interesting.
Dhumimal is actually, it's so surprising to suddenly to walk in Connaught Place and suddenly come across an M.F. Hussain mural in plain sight. There are two murals right outside the art gallery in plain sight. So there's that. In fact, there's a heritage walk leader called Dushyant in Delhi who actually does a very good walk of Connaught Place. And if you get a chance, do attend his walk. He talks about this with great passion. In fact, he pointed this out to me. I had been, visiting that place for like 8-9 years. I didn't even think this could be an M.F. Hussain artwork. So just one last thing before I finish this walk. I also want to talk about one thing that used to define Connaught Place in the early days. The theatres, the cinema halls. Mm-hmm. So Connaught Place, apart from being a shopping district, was also the entertainment district of the new city. You had places like the Regal Cinema Hall, the Rivoli, the Odeon, the Plaza. All of these were some of the top-notch theatres, state-of-the-art theatres at the time. So I'll just quickly go through them one by one. 3 of them are still there. Regal has been demolished. Word is that they are actually rebuilding it into a multiplex. But, well, it's been about 8 years now. So Regal was again managed by Sobha Singh, the man who built Sujan Singh Park in Khan Market, as we talked about. So he owned that theatre, and they even had a stage set up over there where theatre plays would be performed. In fact, even the legendary Prithviraj Kapoor performed a couple of plays over there. And the cinema hall still had a green room until it was operational. And it was visited by so many of these, the elite of the time, including Jawaharlal Nehru himself. It was his favorite theatre, and he also had a movie screened over there. It was extremely high-end. They had privacy, they had boxes. There were 6 boxes in the theatre. They had a bar. It was like nothing else in the city at the time. This started off in 1932, so probably the first theatre in Connaught Place. The other one, which still exists, is the Rivoli Theatre, which came up in the 40s. And to differentiate itself from the others, they decided to go for just the English films. In fact, Psycho was premiered here, and Hitchcock himself came for that.
Really?
So there's that.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
Hitchcock came for that, and right next to it is the India Coffee House, the legendary establishment. And in 2006, Rivoli was actually converted into a PVR under their heritage initiatives. So there's that. The other theatre is it's the Odeon, which was around since the 40s, and this too used to they used to stream English films, but this was known for its accessibility. The way it was located, it had the most options to for people to come over there and all of that, and this was one of the first halls in Delhi to be air conditioned. So that was the differentiator that they had, and this hall was of course patronized by Dev Anand, and all his premieres used to take place here. The Kapoors used to have it in the Regal, and Dev Anand used to have it at Odeon. And it was eventually taken over by Big Cinemas Reliance, and now it's an Inox theatre. And the last of them, the most elite of them all, that's the Plaza, which is again a PVR now. This came up in 1933, right after Regal. This was the most high-end theatre of them all. This was the most expensive theatre. It used to serve cold coffees to the patrons, and they were the ones who used to they had exclusive rights to some Warner Brother films. They were the ones who showed the first Warner Brother films in India in the 60s, and Hollywood legends used to visit this place. Again, it used to be huge back in the day, and it's still around. It's still around as a PVR. Also, I would again like to point out that there's this great book I'd recommend to all our listeners. It's called Delhi 4 Shows. It's by Ziaul Salam, and it covers all the theatres in Delhi, the history of Delhi in theatres. It's an excellent book.
Yeah, really interesting. And great name, a title for the book too, right? Delhi 4 Shows. Yeah, wonderful. Even me, I keep harping about my first visit, but yeah, when I think at first visited Delhi, I was probably in my 5th or 6th grade and summer holidays. So some of the things really etched in my memory were things like these, right? The Connaught Place, Appu Ghar, like back in the day, you used to have that. I don't believe it's still around, right? I don't know if you even know about it, Aditya, but it used to be like
it's gone.
You have? Okay, great. Yeah, it's gone now. That plus your Jama Masjid, like we were put up right across the Jama Masjid. So some of these iconic places, and of course India Gate and all of those, you have to visit when you're in Delhi. But I'm glad, and I'm also really surprised. I would have never thought that, like, as a part of a walk, you could literally cover off a bunch of these places, and I think that's also hats off to how well New Delhi has been planned, right, in a way. So thank you for covering those off. Now, are there more places or points in CP that you wanted to cover off?
So this is the long and short of it, but I could also recommend some places to eat at. I mean, what's the point of being in Delhi if you're not eating around?
Yes, absolutely. And again, as with a lot of other things, opinions about food also are quite controversial sometimes in Delhi, right? Where some people really die by your parathe wali gali and those places, and some others like really call them as over the top and overhyped quite a bit. So, I'm really keen and interested in seeing what you have to say about it as a local.
I would not recommend it to my enemies.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying, right? Yeah, no, I mean, always wherever you try to look up on top places to eat, like this always shows up, but at the same time, you have other people who are giving it brickbats, right? That's just absolutely not the place. It's probably just the name that gets all the hype, but food-wise, it's definitely not the place to spend too much time at.
Right. So, quickly, I'd just like to cover a couple of places throughout this area, throughout the area we walked at. First of all, keep an eye out for all the state bhavans. They are very underrated. You've got the Kerala House, you've got the Andhra Bhavan, you've got the Maharashtra Southern, and a bunch of other houses. There's the Garvi Gujarat Bhavan somewhere there. A lot of these state houses which serve amazing food. Amazing food. So that's one thing I would want our listeners to really check out. Then, of course, there's good teas and quality, which I already talked about. Right. And right next to Rivoli, there's the India Coffee House. But also in Connaught Place, there's this other place called the United Coffee House, which is another old-time establishment. And the owner, he had a very fascinating history. He was a liquor baron in Old Delhi and all of that. And he started off this place. And this is one of those places where you can still find the old world colonial sort of a charm inside it. There are these huge chandeliers, great coffee. It's a very good place to go. So there's that. And again, coming back to India Coffee House, if you're craving for some street food, just walk ahead. You will reach the Hanuman Mandir area where you will find the Kaku Kachori Wale. He makes a brilliant, this kachori you can have with aloo sabzi. There's him across the street. There's the Jain Chawal Wale who makes Rajma Chawal. Amazing Rajma Chawal. You can find great Rajma Chawal anywhere in Delhi, but Jain Chawal has his own, attraction. Of course, then there's Wenger's, which we talked about. Another place that I want to just give a shout out to, it's the Oxford Bookstore, which carries Cha Bar inside it. Mm-hmm. And if you are a tea lover, this is the place to be. And I would strongly recommend check out their Fujian Oolong tea. It's brilliant. So largely these are the places around there. In Delhi the list can just go on and on.
Yeah.
But these are the places you should totally check out.
Yeah, for sure. The walk itself, right? You did cover the last 45-50 minutes, good mix of these different points you can walk through. But in actual distance and time, roughly how much would this entail, and is this also one of the experiences you cover off as a part of your other heritage walks you do?
Right. So this is not a walk that I usually take for a heritage walk. This is just a walk that I like to go on a Saturday morning or something. I just love this area. That's it. That's all there is for me. But if you're looking at the kilometers, I don't want you to go by Google Maps, because the shortest route is something else. But if you just wander through these areas, it's about 6.5 kilometers, and it's going to take you somewhere around 8,000 to 9,000 steps to cover the whole thing.
Okay.
So that's about a little over an hour.
I'm also glad that we're getting an exclusive here. This is not a real walk that Aditya does, but he's done one exclusively for us here on the podcast. So glad to know that. And Aditya has also been kind enough to actually plot these out on the Google map. So for somebody looking for reference, you could easily follow that along. And Aditya, I'm hoping that it's fine to even share that link of the map that you shared with us, just with these pit stops. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a brilliant resource, and tell us a little bit more about the walks, kinds of walks you do, and how people can find out more about that too, Aditya.
So, I don't do walks that regularly these days anymore. I used to do them for this organization I was working for in the past. I believe there are many more qualified people to do these. I would actually recommend people to check out Dr. Swapna Little's walk, Chandrasekhar Tampi's walk, Dushyant Panwar's walk. These are guys who are doing some great work in this. In case I do some walks in the future, I'll put them out on my Twitter and Instagram. I'm on Psychedelic, like psychedelic but with an H, like psychedelic, on all social media. So that's where you can find out about my walks. My walks usually happen, as I said earlier, in either in Chandni Chowk or in Humayun's Tomb or in Purana Killa, because these are the three areas which are rich in stories. Again, I'm not a historian, so I don't like to go into the history part or the architecture part and all of that. So I am more story focused. So I like doing a walk in these areas.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll try and link some of those resources as well as Aditya's social media handles, so listeners can follow along and be notified whenever Aditya is doing these walks. And any final thoughts, Aditya, about Delhi itself or the path we covered today, in terms of points we may have missed covering, or just additional ones you may want to add?
Right. So just one thing. I said take a note of Stein, Joseph Stein in Steinabad when we were discussing Lodi Gardens.
Sure.
The architect who actually put together Lodi Gardens and a lot of those buildings in that area. Joseph Stein also built the India Habitat Center, the India International Center, and a lot of these other great buildings in that area. So our walk begins with Joseph Stein, but our walk ends with another great architect, Charles Correa. And Correa has a building in Connaught Place. It is the building which stands out the most from any other building in that area. This is the Jeevan Bharati building, owned by the LIC. It's a huge red building, huge. And the idea behind this building was to sort of build a landmark for people in CP. So you are always oriented. You know where you have to, you can always see that building and you know the direction around you. And that building also has a gap in between. And, there was a proposal a long while back actually, that you can pass a skywalk through that so people can walk right into CP through that. I don't know how good of an idea that was, but nothing has come out of it yet. So we'll see. So yeah, this walk begins with Stein, ends with Correa, and everything in between.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much, Aditya. I'm so glad that we were able to connect and we were able to bring you to the podcast. And I'm just so glad that another Delhi episode that gives us a sense of the many, many, many layers of Delhi and the many faces of Delhi. Right. So thank you for covering that for us, and really an honor to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, sir. Thanks a lot. It's my pleasure to be on the Musafir Stories. It's full circle.
It is indeed a full circle, from being our producer to now being a guest on the podcast. Thank you so much, Aditya.
Thanks. Thank you.
That was yet another great episode on the Musafir Stories. Make sure to show us some love by sharing the podcast with your friends and family. We are on Instagram and Twitter at Musafir Stories. If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM podcast app or the website. Follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram.